The grand hall of the interstellar station shimmered like a suspended sunrise, glass and crystal bending light into quiet rainbows. Delegates from 2 civilizations lined the balconies, breathing in the charged silence. This was not merely a meeting. It was history balanced on a polished floor. Cameras floated like silent insects, recording every twitch of every eye. Human uniforms contrasted against flowing alien robes, order facing elegance, unease facing ceremony. Somewhere beyond the walls, engines hummed, as if even the station was holding its breath. They called it the bonding exchange, an ancient ritual the aliens had reshaped for diplomacy. 6 humans, 6 of their women, partnered for the duration of negotiations, a living symbol of trust. Algorithms, genealogies, temperament charts, and political expectations had already done the choosing. The participants were expected simply to accept. On the alien side, beauty meant status, symmetry meant honor, and perfection meant power. To stand among them was to be measured in glances sharper than knives, to be weighed, judged, quietly categorized before a single word was spoken. At the center of the hall stood the elevated dais where names would be declared and futures quietly rearranged. The High Mediator waited there, ageless and immaculate, her voice rumored to be able to calm riots or shatter careers. Behind the formal smiles, everyone carried private fears. If this alliance failed, the border disputes would flare again, trade would crumble, and the dream of peaceful expansion would vanish for a generation. Yet beneath the politics lived something smaller, more fragile, and somehow more dangerous. The fact that 12 strangers were about to be bound together under the eyes of 2 worlds, pretending that destiny had chosen them, while knowing destiny had been written by committees and expectations. As the lights dimmed and the ceremony began, even the air seemed to tighten. Somewhere among the assembled envoys stood a human who did not yet realize that the coming choice would expose old secrets, challenge an entire culture, and turn a political ritual into a story whispered for decades, long after the hall finally fell completely silent. His name was Ethan Calder, though on official documents it appeared with titles and clearance markers that made him sound far more important than he felt. He stood near the back of the human delegation, shoulders straight, jaw set, eyes quietly searching rather than admiring. Unlike some of his colleagues, he didn't relish spectacle. He preferred maps, field notes, quiet negotiations in cramped rooms where words actually mattered. Years of work in disputed sectors had taught him that alliances didn't fail because of signatures. They failed because people stopped seeing one another as human. To the aliens, he was categorized as mid-ranking, statistically cooperative, acceptable. To the humans, he was the safe choice. Steady, disciplined, unlikely to embarrass anyone. What they could not measure was the quiet gravity beneath his calm. Ethan carried memories he rarely spoke about, memories that shaped every decision, every calculation. He had come here not only to protect policy but to repay a promise the universe seemed determined to forget. When his name was added to the list of envoys, he felt something click into place, not excitement, not fear, but inevitability. He sensed, without knowing why, that the ceremony ahead would reach backward through time and take hold of a moment he had never managed to let go of. Standing beneath the layered lights, he breathed slowly, steadying himself. Whatever the algorithms decided, he promised he would stay honest, watch closely, and choose with the part of him that remembered compassion before protocol itself. They appeared one by one, gliding into the hall with a grace that seemed practiced since childhood. The alien attendants guided them into position, forming a luminous line along the polished platform. Robes shimmered like liquid metal, catching the ceremonial lights and scattering them into constellations across the floor. Each woman held her chin lifted, ears tilted elegantly, every gesture controlled, every breath part of the performance. To the watching diplomats, this was beauty engineered to reassure, to impress, to remind humanity how small and unfinished it still was. The first in the line belonged to one of the great houses. Her features were symmetrical to the point of mathematics, her skin clear as polished stone. A ripple of approval passed through the alien gallery. The next was equally immaculate, a diplomat bred for display as much as skill. Eyes, posture, voice, perfect. As the line continued, the pattern repeated, perfection, applause, silent comparisons. Even the humans began to understand that beauty here was currency, and every flawless face was a declaration of power. And then the rhythm faltered. Off to the end, slightly apart from the others, stood a woman who broke the pattern simply by existing. Her robe did not quite hide the swirling marks along her arms, traces of copper and shadow that climbed her skin like unruly vines. One ear sat a fraction higher than the other, and a streak of metallic color threaded through her hair where uniform silver should have been. No applause moved through the gallery. Instead, eyes narrowed. Conversations dipped. She folded her hands as if to make herself smaller, practiced at invisibility, braced for the moment when the choice would pass her by yet again, as it always had. She had learned that hope, here, was a dangerous, humiliating thing to bear. Among her own people, the explanation for her exile was simple. The marks meant disorder. Generations of careful breeding had chased randomness out of their blood, sculpting bodies into symbols of control. Anything that strayed from the ideal was treated like a crack in glass, tolerated only until it could be hidden. Children like her learned early to lower their eyes, to speak softly, to apologize for existing. She was reminded at every examination, every official review, that she carried the past's mistakes on her skin. The council called them chaos marks, an unfortunate reminder of the time before perfection. They were charted, catalogued, studied, and quietly despised. Potential assignments vanished the moment she entered a room. Suitors declined without meeting her. Invitations arrived only when presence was required, never desired. When her family house was asked to contribute a representative to the exchange, they chose her not because she was prepared, but because she was expendable. If the humans misunderstood, if offense was taken, the embarrassment would rest safely on her shoulders. Standing in the line, she felt the familiar burn beneath her markings, the shame that always bloomed when eyes lingered too long. She knew how the narrative would unfold. The dignitaries would skim past her, the algorithm would politely avoid her, and another perfect candidate would carry the honor she was never meant to touch. She had survived by shrinking, by making herself a simple background detail. Today, she promised herself, would be no different. Hope was a lesson she had unlearned long ago. Ethan had been trying to study the ceremony like a diplomat, cataloging gestures, noting patterns, keeping emotion locked behind discipline. His gaze followed the line of women the same way it followed star charts, patiently, carefully, without judgment. He expected elegance. He expected distance. He expected to feel like an observer instead of a participant. Then his eyes reached the quiet figure at the edge of the platform, and the practiced calm inside him shattered. There, beneath the lights, stood a face he carried through sleepless nights and half-remembered dreams. At first he thought memory was playing tricks. The markings along her arms, the asymmetrical tilt of her ears, the strange copper streak threading her hair, they matched details he had refused to forget. The years between them collapsed suddenly, replaced by the smell of scorched metal and rain-soaked soil, the taste of medicine bitter on his tongue, the sound of a voice speaking gently to him in words he did not yet understand. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. The hall faded. Protocol vanished. All that remained was recognition, clear and absolute. She did not see him. Her head stayed lowered, shoulders held with careful resignation, as if she had already accepted the outcome of a story written long before she arrived. He wanted to call her name, though he was not sure whether it would still belong to her in this place. Instead, he stood rooted in silence, 1,000 questions burning behind his eyes. How was she here? What had happened to her after he was taken away? And why, of all possible fates, had the universe chosen this moment, this hall, to place them within breathing distance again? In that instant, he understood the ceremony would never proceed as anyone expected from this moment. 5 years earlier, the sky had been a boiling sheet of violet storm, and Ethan's survey craft bucked through it like a trapped insect. The navigation display flickered, alarms stacked over one another, and the hull shuddered with a groan that felt almost human. He had been mapping mineral veins on a world no one officially claimed, gathering data, following routine. Then a burst of static ripped across the cockpit. Every system went blind, and gravity seized the ship like a closed fist. He fought the controls, but the ground rose faster than any training simulation had prepared him for. Treeline blurred, mountains rolled like dark waves, and the craft slammed into the soil with a violence that erased sound. Harness straps bit into his shoulders. The console exploded into sparks. Something sharp carved across his side, and hot wetness spread beneath his uniform. For a stunned breath he thought he had died, because everything felt quiet, enormous, and far away. The quiet didn't last. Pain roared back, thick and pulsing. The cockpit tilted at a broken angle, half buried, rain hissing through the fractured canopy. Toxic warnings flared on the cracked screen. His air filters were failing. He dragged himself free of the seat, each movement tearing new lightning through his ribs. Outside, the world glowed strangely, plants glittering with bioluminescent threads and spires of stone rising like frozen storms. He activated his beacon, watched it sputter, then die. The planet was supposed to be uninhabited. Rescue would come late, if at all. Dizziness washed over him. He stumbled a few meters from the wreck to avoid the leaking fuel and collapsed beneath a crooked tree whose leaves whispered in voices he imagined. Each breath burned. Blood soaked his side. He pressed a field dressing into the wound and tried to calculate how many hours he could survive. Night arrived like a curtain drawn over his thoughts. He drifted in and out, haunted by fragments of childhood, training halls, a face he could not quite remember. Thunder rolled across the valley. Light moved through the trees. Not lightning, not machinery, something slower, deliberate. Footsteps rustled in the wet grass. He forced his eyes open, expecting a predator. Instead, a shadow knelt beside him, careful, undecided. A hand brushed the air near his wound, hesitated, then touched lightly, as if learning the shape of pain. A voice murmured words he did not know, layered with fear and compassion. The last thing he saw was the shimmer of copper hair bending close as darkness swallowed the world. When he finally slipped under, he thought, dimly, that the planet itself had taken pity on him and sent a guardian walking near. He woke to the slow rhythm of dripping water and the faint smell of crushed leaves. Soft light filtered through woven branches overhead, turning the shadows into gentle lattices. His body protested every attempt to move. When he tried to sit up, a firm but careful hand pressed him back. She spoke then, quiet, musical syllables layered with caution. And though he understood none of them, the meaning was unmistakable. Stay still, you're safe. Bandages wrapped his ribs, neat and precise. A bitter salve cooled the gash at his side. Beside the bed, if it could be called that, lay a small pile of alien tools, bowls, and plants cut into specific lengths. She worked like someone accustomed to tending wounds alone, focused and determined. Every so often she glanced at the entrance of the shelter, listening for dangers he could not hear. When their eyes finally met, he recognized uncertainty flickering beneath her composure. She was afraid, not of him, but of being discovered with him. She pointed to herself and spoke a single word, repeating it until he understood, her name. He tried to echo it with his broken accent. She laughed softly, then corrected him, then laughed again when he failed a second time. The sound felt like the first warmth after a storm. They communicated with gestures, sketches in the dirt, clumsy words traded back and forth. She brought food and warned him about plants that looked edible but weren't. She changed his bandages with hands that trembled only when they brushed against his skin. At night, when the storms raged, she stayed near the doorway, watching the glowing forest as if waiting for judgment. Days blurred together. Pain faded. Strength returned. And in the quiet rhythm of healing, he realized a truth that unsettled him more than the crash. This woman, marked and cautious, had risked everything to keep a stranger alive. Long before diplomacy existed, before treaties and ceremonies and perfect smiles, compassion had already chosen its side. The shelter she led him to was nothing more than a hollowed cavern wrapped in living roots, but she had shaped it into something gentle. Small crystals set into cracks cast steady light. A basin caught rain from above. Shelves of woven fiber held carefully labeled plants, each one with a purpose she demonstrated patiently. He learned how she boiled the toxins from local water, how she stitched wounds with thread grown from vines, how certain leaves could cool fever while others sharpened dreams. They developed a language that was equal parts words and courage. He taught her basic human phrases, and she repeated them with a seriousness that made him smile. She corrected his attempts at her language, tapping the air when he mispronounced a tone, nodding proudly when he finally got it right. Nights they would sit just inside the entrance, watching lightning crawl across distant ridges while they traced constellations neither shared. Yet everything between them existed in the fragile space of secrecy. She never stayed when patrol drones buzzed over the valley. She always masked their tracks, scattered ash over the fire, listened for echoes with a stillness that spoke of consequences he could only imagine. Once, when he asked, clumsily, why she hid, she looked at her marked arms, then at the sky, and simply said a word he had learned too well, forbidden. He didn't press her. Gratitude felt larger than curiosity. With each passing day, the fear that he would die faded, only to be replaced by another fear entirely, that he might leave this sanctuary and never see her again. He began to understand that survival was not the only gift she had given him. She had given him something far rarer, the quiet, dangerous possibility of being seen. The rescue beacon finally caught someone's attention on the 12th morning. He heard the distant thrum of engines before she did, a low vibration threading through the ground. When the sound reached her ears, her entire body went rigid. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. Instead, she moved with urgent precision, gathering herbs, scattering ashes, erasing every trace that he had ever existed there. He tried to thank her, stumbling through her language, promising he would explain, that he would return, that he would tell them she had saved his life. Fear flashed across her face, sharper than any storm. She shook her head hard and pointed toward a narrow crevice at the back of the cave. Hide. No debate. No time. Outside, the search team's lights washed the valley in sterile white. Voices called his name. He stepped forward reluctantly, each step feeling like betrayal. Before he crossed the threshold, he looked back. She stood in the shadows, hands pressed to her chest, eyes bright with unshed tears she refused to let fall. He whispered her name. She lifted 2 fingers in a small farewell, a gesture meant to disappear, and then she vanished into darkness as they carried him away. The present snapped back around him like a tightened collar. The dais glowed brighter, and the High Mediator lifted the ceremonial tablet with a composure that suggested everything was already settled. Names began to echo through the chamber, translated in gentle tones for human ears. One by one, pairs formed. Hands touched. Formal bows were exchanged. Each selection was greeted with polite applause, as predictable as the tides. Ethan listened, but he no longer heard the order of the ritual. He tracked only 2 names, his and hers. With every pairing announced, the line grew shorter, the options slimmer, the pressure thicker. Whispers drifted from the balconies. He could feel Richard, the colleague beside him, vibrating with anticipation, eyes fixed greedily on the most celebrated woman in the row. Politics thrived on appearances. Most humans, he knew, would take the obvious match if offered. It was safer that way. Then a subtle shift entered the mediator's voice. By traditional protocols, she announced, the remaining envoys will be assigned according to compatibility and standing. The screen flickered. Algorithms hummed. The hall waited. 2 human names remained. 2 alien women remained, one radiant with perfection, the other standing apart like a quiet contradiction. The mediator paused longer than etiquette allowed. Envoy Ethan Calder, she said, each syllable precise. By custom, you may choose. A murmur rippled outward. Richard's head snapped toward him, stunned and envious. Every alien gaze sharpened. Choosing wrongly, Ethan understood, would ignite centuries of pride. Choosing safely would bury the truth of 5 years beneath silence forever. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of worlds settle on his shoulders. The perfect woman inclined her head in expectation. The marked woman braced for disappointment. And in that suspended breath before he spoke, Ethan realized the ceremony had become something else entirely, not a political performance, but the moment when memory and courage finally collided. He didn't hesitate. His voice carried across the hall with calm certainty. cutting through the murmurs like a clean blade. I choose her. No title. No apology. Just the simple truth, offered without flinching. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the translation systems seemed to stall, as if unsure they had heard correctly. Then the shock arrived, a collective intake of breath, followed by a rising tide of whispers that rustled through the balconies like unsettled wind. Richard's face collapsed into disbelief, outrage chasing envy across his features. The perfect woman blinked, stunned, her practiced smile freezing at the edges. But the marked woman reacted differently. Her head snapped up, golden eyes wide, as though someone had spoken a miracle she didn't dare believe. Hope flickered, fragile, disoriented, before fear quickly tried to smother it. The High Mediator's composure cracked for the smallest instant. "Envoy," she said carefully, "perhaps you misunderstood." "I did not," Ethan replied, steady as stone. "My choice stands." The words rolled outward, impossible to retract. Officials exchanged urgent glances. Recorders zoomed closer. Protocol bent beneath the pressure of a decision no algorithm could predict. And somewhere, deep inside a life shaped by shame, something long buried began to awaken. Protocol delivered them to a side corridor, away from cameras and applause. Doors sealed. Silence settled. For a long moment neither spoke, as if one wrong syllable might shatter the fragile thing between them. Ethan exhaled first. He said her name the way someone uncovers a relic, careful, reverent, afraid it might crumble. She flinched, as though the sound itself hurt. "You should not have chosen me," she whispered. "They will say you mocked us. They will think you did it to humiliate my people." He shook his head. "I chose you because you once chose me." Confusion wavered across her features, then recognition struck like light breaking through cloud. Memories rushed between them. The forest, the salve, the storm. Her hands trembled. "You lived?" she breathed, half astonished, half relieved. "I thought they would erase you. I thought I imagined you." "They didn't," he said gently. "You saved my life. I have spent 5 years trying to honor that." Tears welled, not dramatic, just inevitable. "Ethan, you do not understand. My presence is a warning to others. I am the example of what not to become. By choosing me, you have insulted every perfect house." "Then let them feel insulted," he replied, softer than defiance, firmer than apology. "Your worth wasn't engineered in a laboratory. I saw it when no one was watching you." She covered her marked arms, a habit older than trust, then slowly lowered her hands. "You risk more than reputation." "So do you," he answered. "But we face it together." For the time since the ceremony began, her posture changed. Not bolder exactly, but less small. She studied him as though weighing the truth within his eyes, and a quiet strength flickered there, fragile but unmistakably alive, and for the time, she breathed easier. The summons arrived before they could finish another sentence. 2 officials escorted them through curved corridors, faces carved from protocol. The doors of the council chamber parted with a hush, revealing a semicircle of immaculate figures seated beneath a halo of white light. No audience. No applause. Only judgment. They did not offer Ethan a seat. They questioned him standing, as if discomfort might hurry the truth loose. The lead counselor folded her perfect hands. "Explain your choice," she said, tone polished and cold. "This exchange honors excellence. You selected a symbol of failure." He could feel Thera stiffen beside him, but she did not step back. Ethan let the silence stretch until even the lights seemed to listen. "I chose the person who saved a stranger at risk to herself," he replied. "If that is failure, perhaps your measurements are broken." Murmurs rippled, quickly stifled. Another counselor leaned forward. "Compassion does not erase defective genetics." Ethan met her gaze. "No," he said, "but arrogance does not create virtue. You call these marks chaos. I call them stories your perfection tried to erase." For a heartbeat, the chamber wavered between offense and something that felt like uncertainty. The lead counselor raised a hand, restoring stillness. "We will deliberate," she said, voice softer than before. Your pairing stands, for now. Know that consequences follow choices. As they were dismissed, Ethan sensed the ground subtly shift, as though the first crack had opened in a wall everyone once believed unbreakable after this day. News traveled faster than any ruling. By the time they left the chamber, the station buzzed like a disturbed hive. Screens replayed the moment of his choice from a dozen angles, commentators whispering speculation as if afraid to speak too loudly. Some aliens watched with open disdain, ears tightened flat in disgust. Others stared longer than etiquette allowed, studying Thera's markings with something that looked suspiciously like curiosity instead of scorn. Among the humans, reactions fractured. A few congratulated Ethan in hushed tones, calling his decision bold, even necessary. Others warned him quietly that treaties were fragile things, and heroes often became scapegoats when consequences arrived. Through it all, Thera walked with measured steps, neither shrinking nor preening, simply existing in a space that had never before made room for her. Messages began to arrive, encrypted notes from younger aliens, unsigned statements shared across private networks. Thank you. I have marks too. For the first time, I wondered if I could stop hiding. Thera read them in silence, fingers trembling. The outrage was real. The backlash was immediate. But alongside it, faint and persistent, something new began to stir. The uneasy sense that a rule everyone accepted might finally be open to question. In the days that followed, ceremony gave way to work. Negotiation tables replaced the glittering hall. Translators hovered. Data flowed. And somehow, despite the tension, Ethan and Thera functioned with startling ease. Where he asked questions, she offered context. Where she anticipated cultural traps, he slowed the pace, guiding discussions before they hardened into conflict. Their partnership felt less like assignment and more like conversation resumed after a long interruption. They shared meals quietly, comparing notes, trading stories when exhaustion loosened caution. Sometimes she caught herself forgetting to hide her arms, and when she remembered, he would simply continue speaking as if nothing required apology. That small, unwavering normalcy became its own shield. Of course, scrutiny never faded. Officials watched them like a problem waiting to happen. One evening, a senior diplomat warned Ethan that sentiment could not be allowed to influence statecraft. He agreed, then added, gently, that sometimes statecraft needed to remember sentiment existed. Word of that exchange traveled farther than he intended. Yet despite the whispers, agreements began to form. Draft clauses softened. Old grievances found new language. And in the quiet between sessions, Thera realized something astonishing. She was contributing, shaping outcomes, not merely standing as a cautionary symbol to be endured. The signing ceremony arrived with less spectacle than the first, yet it carried a weight that felt deeper, steadier. When the final signatures shimmered into place, applause rose, not thunderous, but sincere, as if everyone sensed that something fragile had survived pressure meant to crush it. Ethan felt Thera's hand tighten in quiet disbelief. Later, away from cameras, they stood beside a viewport where the stars drifted slow and patient. She traced the faint constellations beyond the glass, then glanced at the marks across her arms as though seeing them for the first time without flinching. All my life, she said softly, I was told to disappear. And yet, Ethan replied, you kept saving people anyway. She considered that, then let out a breath she seemed to have held for years. The future still held arguments, backlash, and difficult choices. Neither of them doubted it. But the path before them no longer felt like exile. It felt like a beginning. If tomorrow demanded courage, they would meet it together. And in the quiet hum of the station, among stars older than both their cultures, the truth settled gently. Sometimes the most radical act was not defiance or victory, but simply choosing, again and again, to see one another clearly.